at now, getting it out soon, is Tariffs Allow. I'm also on the Gamma DEI committee, and I also am the co-chair of the Gamma Horizons Fellowship. And I own and run the Happy Jacks RPG podcast, which surprisingly talks about RPGs. So yeah, lots of fun stuff. Okay, are we clapping? We're doing clapping. Okay.
Hi, I'm John Clair. I'm a tabletop game designer. I've been doing it for, since I was a kid, but professionally since probably like 2016 was when my first game that got some attention came out. And I'm still doing it now full time. Noteworthy games that people may or may not have heard of: Space Base, Mystic Vale, most recently Mistborn, and a number of others.
Afternoon. Name is Gary Alaka. I'm one of the co-founders and co-designers with Gap Blizzard Games. Our main games, our top two games, we have two games, are Rival Restaurants and Illiterati. My design career began when I was 6, and I was stuck in a mountain home for 3 weeks without Wi-Fi, which didn't exist back then. And we made our own version of Monopoly using scraps of paper. So that was how I started designing games.
I am Damon Stea. I am the co-founder of Ixion Gameworks. I'm definitely the newest designer in this panel, even though I've been designing casually for 20 years. I was a filmmaker for most of that time, and I've only actually been published for a little over a year. So the first game we put out is Ship Show. That's in Barnes & Noble now. And then the second one, Sovereign, ships in about a month, but that made about 150K on Kickstarter and did pretty well. And so, yeah, we're getting that up to 2,000 people. And then Modifius is taking over that as well. So that went pretty well.
I'm Jackie Fuchs, the designer of Rock Hard 1977, which has been nominated for 4 Dice Tower Awards. So that's really cool, including Game of the Year, which I will not win, but I was not expecting to be nominated. So that is awesome. And right now, I just delivered an expansion for Rock Hard to DeVere, and I think that will come out sometime in 2026.
That's awesome. Another round of applause. Thank you so much. First and foremost, we have to start with this question. And usually how I run panels is I'll probably point to one of y'all, and then everybody can just talk after that if you'd like. But first and foremost, we've got to start with the very basics, right? How did you get into game design? And I'm going to read people's faces. Kimmy, you're going first.
Yeah, I tried to do the blank face. The teacher doesn't call on you if you don't look invested. Okay. Yeah, seriously. I got into game design because I was the forever GM of my RPG group. I was running game after game after game at conventions, and generally my games come from things I see are lacking in the space or things I want. So my first game that I made, Decima, was kind of like a pre-game that sets up a campaign for an RPG, because I was pulling all this stuff and trying to have my home group come up with things for to world build for it. And I was like, okay, we need a streamlined way to do this. So I made it. It's tarot based. I just had this deck of Miss Cleo cards with labels on it. And I was using it at conventions, and people were like, oh, this is so great. Where can I get this? I was like, I don't know. I can print them out for you if you want the labels. Cool. And then from there, people were like, you should make this. And then I decided to try and do that. So yeah, because there were things I wanted and they didn't exist. So I decided to make them.
I will second that. That is why I became a designer. I looked at my shelf one day with a 5-player game group, and we literally had one game that we were all kind of willing to play, but none of us were excited about it. And I went, why can there not be a 5-player strategy game that is quick turns and where you're involved in what everybody else is doing and where you have that little fun factor that you get in so-called Ameritrash games. I'm just going to embrace that word. And I just went, you know what? That game doesn't exist. And I've been a storyteller forever. And people ask, because I was in the rock band, The Runaways, and people always want to say, you should tell your story. And I don't want to because I would get sued by people who don't want their stories told. So I went, you know what? I'm just going to put a nice fictionalized version in a board game. And yeah, you can ask me privately which things are true because most of them are. But yeah, same reason pretty much.
John, I'm going to ask you this
Sure.
question as well too. So
No.
it sounds like the industry considers you a veteran at this point. So how did you even get into this in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how far back you want to go. I was a nerdy kid who liked anything game related. The first sort of game-ish things I ever designed when I was very young, I loved drawing mazes, but I would gamify them, right, with like rules and stuff. But as a professionally, after college, I sort of set myself the goal of getting a game published. I had a whole bunch of ideas, but I tried to hone in on an idea that I thought would be easier to pitch initially based on just my sort of assessment of the market, but I didn't know really what I was doing that much at the time. Yeah, but I mean, iterating on a whole bunch of different game ideas, there's a lot we'll get into on the game discussion of like, things you shouldn't have done when you were first designing.
I'll come back to you for that.
Yeah, but it was on my own designing. I made a card game called Kapow, and then I pitched it to publishers. Got very little interest in my email pitching, no responses, and I learned how to pitch better. Eventually, that one got picked up amazingly by email pitching, and then continued working on other games. And I started going to conventions and pitching, and yeah, I mean, the first kind of hit I had was Mystic Vale, and that sort of changed my trajectory from there.
Gary, if I can have your time next for this question. But Damon, Jackie, I'm coming for you for this question as well. Okay. So, what skills, either maybe through schooling, other professional endeavors, maybe independent study as well, what skills have served you in game design that you might not think to build up while you're designing a game?
Yeah, I think for me, so I have, at this point, now 15 years of youth ministry experience, where you're kind of always designing games on the fly. And I think the skill there was, how do you take non-gamers, right? These are teenagers who don't have rules, and how do you create games that are intuitive and relatable? And I think that is something that we apply to our games today, where, like, I personally will play a game that doesn't have necessarily a rhyme or reasons why you're doing something. But I would find that with kind of like the gateway gamer or a new gamer, the more intuitive an action felt, the more likely they are to just understand it and grasp it. And that was, I think, just from like seeing how I would explain things to the kids and try to explain, hey, we're gonna play this game, and this is, a version of basketball meets, Quidditch, and we're gonna do all these, so you're trying to give them this sort of like framework for what we're doing. And like, I would avoid making up words that didn't exist and then trying to define them, because then they would get so caught up in that. So I think that having that kind of like experience working with new gamers or future gamers has really helped me and how we as a company approach the games that we design.
Damon, was there anything from filmmaking that you had picked up that translated into game design?
Definitely, and I have this experience talking to a lot of people at conventions as well. There's a lot of overlap between the film world and both board games and video games in two different directions. So if you spend a lot of time as a writer or as any kind of artist, like a storyboard artist or something like that, then it's going to translate over to your game design, at least from a storytelling perspective. But also your time as a filmmaker is spent trying to analyze people's emotions, right? You're not trying to manipulate people's emotions, but you are trying to incite someone to feel something from a series of stationary images. And that's the same thing we're trying to do with games, right? There's some people who approach it from a very math-first perspective, but I come to it from a very emotion-first perspective. What do I want you to feel, and how do we get from A to B? And then how do I step back and get you to tell each other stories to get you to feel that between the game space. So definitely film helps with that. But also, I went to school for for film. And there's a serious overlap between film and game degrees. So I also have a degree in game design. And there's not a lot of designers who have a degree in game design. I was only one of like 9 people, and that was a video game design degree, but all of our time was spent making board games.
I think the other 8 are in this room right now, right?
So I didn't expect to be making tabletop games in that at all. I expected to be making digital stuff. And most of our time was spent making these paper prototypes. And I find it way more fun to make the paper prototypes than the like half constructed video games we ended up with, and just kind of kept down that path.
Hey, Jackie, don't make me regret this.
You're going to regret this.
Being a rock star.
Yeah.
What is translated from being on stage making music to game design?
I think being able to get up in front of people and to brand yourself and pitch yourself, which is probably the only real skill that I had previously in life that translates to the game space, that and the fact that I was an entertainment attorney for decades. So when it came to negotiating my contract, I was, the queen of that.
Rock star lawyer?
Yeah.
That sounds made up.
And the part that sounds made up is 4-time Jeopardy champion. So I've had an interesting life, but honestly, I had no skills other than a willingness to sit down and figure out how the sausage was made. And so I sat down and played game after game after game and went, what do I like about this? Where am I checked out? And I brought that skill to playtesting. Because I'm leaping forward, I understand here, but when you're play testing a game, it's not just about the feedback verbally that people give you, it's about watching them and looking for engagement. You have to play test in person. I mean, if I could impress one skill upon people, it's knowing how to run play tests. And that's the biggest thing you can do is see when people are checking out and itching to get out their phones. It's like, that's got to go. So do you regret asking me this?
No.
Okay.
I think this panel could go another 3 hours.
Always.
John, I told you I was coming back to you. And then Kimi, if you're going to be on deck for this.
Okay.
So what are some of your first failures in game design? And what do you think what lessons do you think you pulled from that?
Yeah, so the first big complicated game I ever tried to make, I spent a lot of time writing a rule book and designing components and coming up with theme and story before ever getting the game to ready to play. So I still do that now, even though I know I shouldn't. So some lessons you don't learn, but that is a good one to learn, that the amount of time you spend proving that your idea is worth working on should be as short as possible, right? We as game designers, we don't suffer from too few ideas. We suffer from too many ideas, and you don't want to spend a bunch of time on an idea that doesn't prove out. When you've got one other great idea waiting to be worked on, right? So yeah, sort of over designing before getting to a playtest is something that I would that it's a common problem, and one to lose track of easily. I have a counterpoint to that somewhat, which is, and it's part of why I spend too much time on my prototypes out the gate still. I find the process of laying out the components, and actually graphic designing the UI of the components, helps hone in on the game systems and my perception of the play to begin with. So I still find that useful to a point, but recognizing where the point is important. I still today sometimes be like, I spent too much time on that. Yeah.
All right, for me. So I decided to do everything the hard way. So I actually don't pitch my games to a publisher. I am my own publisher as well. So I am responsible for every step along the game creation process, including hiring art, hiring layout, hiring proofreaders, getting it printed, getting it shipped, getting it in stores, seeing if any retailers want it. So I quadrupled, that's not a thing, but I did it, my workload by wanting to do everything myself. I don't think that was a mistake. my husband might disagree. But for me, when I first started, I did not create super detailed long-term like layout plans and everything as far as this is we're going to have the play test done by. We're going to play test for this much time. We're going to then, have this much time. And I have learned that is an incredibly important piece. So if you are going into self-publishing, make sure that there's templates online that are very helpful. None of them are for game design, but you can like tweak them for other long-term projects just to make sure you have those people locked in and have contracts for everyone for the appropriate time frame when your project gets to that point.
For all of our panelists, we have that argument: mechanics first versus narrative first. Who is passionate about one side or the other? So if you want to just go down the line, mechanics or narrative. So
oh, come on! I did a game about what it's like to be a rock star in 1977. I think it's pretty obvious what was important to me. I'm always about the story and the experience.
I mean, narrative, absolutely. But like the narrative can be very, very rudimentary. So like my latest game, I think it's my latest game. There's a game over at the Indie Games area called Tag Tower. And that was based on just like driving through downtown. There are some very, very tall buildings that are completely empty that nobody's living in. And they've been tagged from bottom to top, 2 of 3 of them. And I was like, that's fascinating. Like, what was the process? What was the process by which you created such a thing? Like the building, I don't care about. The tag that created the actual artwork, because the building isn't doing anything and will never be inhabited. At some point, somebody will have to knock it down. But right now, it's a piece of bizarre community art. And so then I was like, I want to make a game out of that, right? And that's not like a dense story. It doesn't have any characters or anything else. But that narrative, that little micro narrative, is what drives the structure. And I think when we're testing games, it's very, very important to have a narrative framework. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to hang anything on it other than math. And somebody who isn't really engaged with the math is not going to be able to parse anything that they're getting.
You would think somebody who studied film could come up with the words high concept.
I'll stay on the theme of narrative. I guess to share a story. So our latest game was, the title was born first. This is after PAX Unplugged, maybe 4 years ago now, after a long day of pitching games. And we're sitting around and the name Illiterati came out. And we then spent the next 6 months designing a game that could fit that theme, which was, I would not suggest that is a horrible way to design games, by naming them first and then trying to design your way into it. But it actually forced us to kind of go down a path of, can we make a word game? Can we make a world building game, if you will, and kind of take things that we haven't really tried before. So that helped us because it kept us grounded in, okay, this has to be a word game about this secret society of villains who are trying to spread illiteracy, right? And everything we would do then kind of came out as, oh, we should have books and there should be librarians, and like we would make these these themes. And then it would just feel so natural as you actually make the mechanics work. That, again, I don't recommend this, but that's how we kind of end up always being, where we just can't let go of that idea and something has to be made out of it. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I have typically been a mechanics first designer, not always though. But I don't think of it so much as that. It's sort of whatever gives your game a justification for existing is where you should start, right? Whether that is a unique theme or just a theme that you find super compelling and you're excited to work on, a theme that's been underdone, or whether it's a mechanic that, like, I've not seen this particular mode of fun done in a game before, or done in this combination. I think so. Whatever is giving your game a reason to exist, that's the starting point for me. I try to work on that at the beginning of the game. Make sure I can say why my game why this idea deserves to exist, right? In a world where we have 10,000 new games being made every year, why should this game exist, right? And if you can't precisely answer that question, maybe you should come up with a new idea. Yeah, so that's where I often start, and sometimes it's theme, sometimes it's not. Lately, I've worked on a number of IP-based games, so most recently Mistborn came out. So clearly that's a theme first game. But in that case, I'm starting with the theme as the inspiration and the bedrock of the design, and then I'm looking for a game system that really fits that in a way that matches what we want in terms of complexity and audience for the game, and the theme, right? So I still almost approach it design like I have the theme already in place, right? And then I go straight to like, well, what is a core game system that could fit it, right? And in that case, the purpose of the Mistborn game is in large part to serve the Mistborn audience, right? The people who love the books and want to play and want a playground where they can experience the characters in the world, right? So I don't need to come up with a game system that justifies itself, right? Through unique game system. It doesn't have to be that different than games that already exist. Because thematically it is serving its purpose through a different way, right? That doesn't mean it can't also have unique game system, but it's not as essential. So, yeah, whichever path is appropriate for the initial inspiration.
Yeah, very similar. I've done both. RPGs have a unique ability for people to explore and try their feelings on about different things. So I tend to get ideas about things I want people to figure out about themselves. Because when you're putting a character on, you're acting it out, you can really find out things about yourself. So like one of my first games was, about the feminist tropes in literature. And then it's more fun than it sounds. And, one was about let's create worlds together. I am working on a little unicorn game because I want, more avenues for young girls like my daughter to enter into the hobby, things like that. So I generally have like a goal of what I want the game to say. And then after I have that kind of locked in place, then I also then kind of look for mechanics that then support the ideas that I want people to explore while they're playing.
Just about everybody touched on something that I think is very important, which are USPs, unique selling points, right? Where I mostly worked in the branding world, and making sure that that the product you have is unique and memorable is going to carry you a lot further than you think. To our panel, I wanted to ask, what are maybe some visual or auditory, verbal or non-verbal sorts of cues that you place in games that you're so happy that's associated with your game?
Well, I will tell you, I made it a condition of my contract that there be amplifiers with knobs that turned to track stats. And I made the mistake that John talks about. I spent like a year trying to figure out how to make an amplifier with knobs that worked. But it was really cool, and it was an eye-catching thing. And for me, it's a tactile experience. Because to be a rock star, you are cranking your dial up, and I wanted that to be reflected in the game. And it's a little bit of toyification, but it really conveys the world.
In the case of Sovereign, we pitched to so many publishers, and each one took in a slightly different direction what they kind of expected from it. And we had never intended to go to Kickstarter initially because we thought that it would be almost impossible to get the capital for all the art and get all the art done in this huge game that had hundreds and hundreds of pieces of art to rival something like Magic. Some publishers said that they wanted to get rid of most of the art in a game that was about 50% art. We had to say no. And some looked at the walls of text, much of which was flavor text. There's flavor on everything. There's a 24-page storybook that comes along with it that's not necessary to play the game. This just comes along for the ride in the box. And definitely, I had a very spirited conversation with Jamie Stegmaier about how he wanted to get rid of all of the text in the game, which rivals like a novella in how much text is in this game. Some of it is necessary, some of it is not. Very spirited in how that is not even remotely the same. The experience is like an enveloping experience that requires that. That the whole cannot be split into its parts. And that's in the end why we went to Kickstarter, was to have that kind of control and be able to say like, this is what is necessary to get this off the ground.
Gary, I know for you specifically, the new acrylic figures just came out today. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Am I incorrect?
No, you're correct.
Yeah. So what made you go with a choice like that?
Backers. I mean, so I'm the kind of person that like I just want a game. Like I don't need to have all the fancy components and things like that. And also I want the game to be accessible to as many people, right? So, we're trying to have quality components that are accessible, and acrylic is not the most accessible component. So we begrudgingly added them thinking that who's really going to want this? And it's like, this is a box of acrylics, right? Of I think it's 27 chefs now in a box, and they came out beautiful, and I think they're amazing. And our backers really wanted them and showed up for them. And now that I have them, I play with them. I'm like, okay, this feels kind of nice to be able to go around with it. But I do think that, so for some games, I think the components make a difference, right? So I'm sure many of you here have played Quacks of Quedlinburg, right? And unless you have a token holder for the cardboard pieces, it's different, right? And I believe the new version that came out, they just went out the gate with like a good feel. So I think if you're handling something often, you want it to feel good. And in our game, it's like you're touching the chef, here and there, but it's not the same as like, mahjong tiles or chess pieces, things that you really, really want to have. So I would say it's probably less important for us in our games. It's more of like a nice to have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm known for the card crafting system, which uses transparent cards. Oh, sorry, it specifically uses card sleeves as a method to modify cards as part of the gameplay of the game. Usually that's in tandem with transparent cards, multiple going into the same sleeve during the game. Broadly, I call a certain sort of creative inspiration approach called that I like to call kinetic design, where you think about the physicality of the components of the game, and through the physicality of the components, you look for inspiration and new game systems. So can you discover some sort of really interesting and different way to have a game operate through just the physical components of the game, right? Or if you have if you're working on a particular game and you're looking to solve a problem or do something new in just this aspect of the game, you can look for that. So like an example of that is my game Dead Reckoning, where more or less the game was working in many ways, and I needed a combat system in the game, and I didn't want to just do. I wanted to do something different with my combat system, something that was like, oh, I haven't seen that before. So I was like going through how can you make the components of the game do something in a fun sort of kinetic way that hasn't really been done before. And my solution in that game was like a cube tower, where the cubes fall through the tower and then fall out onto a board, and where they land depends on the outcome of the battle. One thing I really like in games with fighting is like the combat to resolve really fast, and you get back to this decision part of the game. And that was a solution. Just like drop it all at once. It's one sort of cinematic moment. So I find anytime you can look at the components and say, how can this component do something different than it typically does, in a way that introduces interesting design space, it's an interesting thought exercise. Could be useful.
For TTRPGs, it's a little more difficult because it's a book. So I can make the book look real pretty, so people want to buy it. That's like the number one goal. Just sort of tangentially related. I'm an elementary school teacher. I've been an elementary school teacher for 16 years. Making my books and then also the PDF copies of it as accessible as possible. And making sure when I do have card components to games and stuff, that things are not just like color coded, but also have symbols and stuff on the back, so that if people have difficulty seeing different colors and stuff, they're able to. That's something that's been kind of core to my brand.
For our last question, before I get to the audience, I was hoping that one or two of you would answer this one. But we also have the crucial part of asking for feedback when it comes to the games that we build. So when it comes to receiving constructive feedback, who are you going to get that feedback, and why is that?
Only the people that'll say nice things about my game.
I like the opposite. I want people who are going to tear. I want people who are going to tear into it like, as early as possible. I am like blessed with friends who are both blunt and needy, so they will like tear in. If like the game is boring them, they're not going to like look at their phone. They're going to tell me like this game is boring. It has to stop or get more interesting. But they'll accept if I'm then rapidly making it more interesting very quickly, and then we can continue playing. So that's like the first line of defense. Is like a series of core friend groups. I can test some alpha games on this and not have to worry about it breaking down completely. And then when I take generalized feedback, some of that depends on how, if a game is far more done, then it depends on how deeply they engaged with the system. Like how much time have they spent with it? Have you come back 3 times during a convention and it's now like the 3rd day and now you have feedback? Well, now I'm probably going to listen to it a lot more because you've engaged way deeper than anybody else has probably in that system. And now you have more to say. Even if it's not correct, even though I don't agree with it, I'm going to listen a lot more intently.
All right. I did want to open up the floor to our audience as well too. We have incredible game designers for you to ask any sorts of questions you like. Is there anybody with a burning question? I'm going to go here first.
All right. I was curious if you think about unused systems for your games. So like when people are learning, they can take things back, or for more complex games, how many times do you expect people to play before they fully understand the systems and rules?
I will say I intentionally designed a game that experienced gamers would be willing to play, but that they could, and hopefully happy to play, but that they could introduce people who were new to modern board gaming and pull them in. So I wanted to hit wingspan complexity, which is a very scary place to be as a designer because you worry that your game is going to be too complex for beginners, but not engaging enough for experienced players who want something more juicy. So you just kind of bridging that gap, I think, was the hardest design element for me, and one that I just took a leap of faith into.
Yeah, I think similarly, it's not every game is for everyone, right? So I think really knowing who you're designing for. I've had to learn not to design for myself. Because I want a crunchier game, but I can't actually design a crunchier game. And I know that my audience is kind of that like, I don't know, wingspan, a little before wingspan type level. So I think having that mindset. So I've only co-designed, and I feel like in our symbiotic relationship, I'm kind of the guy who's like, guys, remember the audience. Like, I know we want to do all these crazy things, but we got to bring them back because this is what the game is for. So I would say that we try to design games that take complex concepts from crunchy games and sort of like introduce them, right? So it's like, oh, this is what, set collections like. This is what trading is like. And then we hope actually that they would graduate right into the hobby. So there was a question earlier. I think one of my favorite comments is when someone plays our games and say, oh, after I played your game, I went and bought Terraforming Mars and I bought all these games. I was like, I have not played those games myself, but that is incredible to see that they're able to kind of go into the rabbit hole and kind of, not elevate, but just start playing different games and they maybe would not have run out at the bat. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've all heard a lot about like the impact of like tariffs on obviously board games. A lot of different perspectives. And so I'm curious, as you all are probably closest to it, what you've seen from like publishers in terms of them maybe accepting less games or more about like cost of components or how they're adapting. Just curious what you all have experienced.
Well, personally, I love tariffs. Is that not the answer we're supposed to get?
We've got a very active tariff situation right
very
here.
active. The tariffs hit right as we were proofing Sovereign. So we had a massive print run that is being like, the tariffs were 30 and then they were 50 and then they were 100 then they exceeded 100.
They were 143.
Then it was an embargo, yeah.
Well, the thing is, it's going up and down and up and down and up and down. And we're trying to communicate with backers at the same time. So like our customers are some of them are getting news, some of them are not reading news. Some of them are in countries affected, some of them are not in countries affected. The majority are in the US. Most of them, luckily, we're very, very pro us and anti-tariff. And we're very much on the side of like, we will help you, just don't let the game die. And I think that changed a lot in how I looked at it. When the tariffs hit, we were so afraid, where we're like, if this goes high enough, we're going to have to ask for more money, or this cannot be, we cannot make the game. We still can't get it out of China if we do. And that's terrifying, to have to ask people for cash who you just charged for a Kickstarter game, which is a lot of money. And while we were waiting to like deliver news, like waiting to see what the tariffs are doing, we were getting like a deluge of people telling us ahead of time that like, we will cover the tariffs for you. And I'm like, well, we're not even going to ask you to do that. But that is very helpful to hear, to know that like the thing that scared them largely wasn't the tariff itself. The thing that scared them was the idea that it would kill so many companies that they wouldn't get the games, or that the games that they had now invested in an ecosystem would die. Because they really, really wanted the game and the company to continue. And that was something that we didn't know until the tariff hit, and now we do.
JPG, there's an interesting point here, which is when I'm designing games, I mean, you can't not design if that's what's in your heart because of a fear of tariffs. But even without tariffs, I think it's a good idea to think, what are the components required for my game? Because you know that you're going out to publishers with a sell sheet, and you're listing your components for a reason, because a publisher is looking and going, does this fit in with my product line and my production schedule? And how much is it going to cost me to produce this? So what will the selling point be? And I think that I went into, Rockhard is my first published game, but I asked one publisher had it for 7 months, and I kept asking them, which is less expensive, cards or tokens? I was literally designing around cost. And I think that's something that as a designer, you really need to be thinking about when you're creating your components, and eliminating things like, even if you go, oh, this game's got to have great miniatures, maybe it doesn't. What do you need, and what's the hill that you're willing to die on? Because you want to keep your costs down regardless.
As a content creation consultant, the only thing that should have tariffs are podcast equipment. There's too much out there. I think we had a question in the corner over here.
So when it comes to going back to the narrative versus mechanics, most of the games that I'm personally interested in seeing have a very strong narrative and have a mechanic that is not just functional, but thematic within the narrative itself. How do you make that happen? I know that's a huge question, but what do you do to make that happen?
Since it's a tough one, I'm throwing it to John. Sorry, man.
I think you know you're in the right place as a designer if the language the players use to describe what they're doing makes sense in the context of the theme. Or if you can specifically take, language and words that make sense and like imbue them into your game mechanisms. So pulling from my own experience, we can talk about Mistborn, since it's the most recent IP game I did, right? If you're familiar with Mistborn, you'll know there are allomancers who ingest metals and then they burn it like you're burning calories to do magical powers, right? So that was the most important thing to make happen in the game in a way that felt thematically appropriate. So I wanted people to be using the language of the books. Like, I'm going to burn this, I'm going to burn iron in order to do a thing, right? So even while you're playing cards, like I play this and then I burn iron to pull this card, and then I do steel to push that thing, right? So anytime you can get the way people describe the things they're doing on their turn, if you really know you're in a great place, if someone can describe what happened in the game to someone else without using any rules, you can just say, this is what happened in the game. So another one, I'm working on a baseball game right now, which is maybe my favorite game I've ever made, but partially because I'm a big baseball fan. But like, you can just describe to someone what happened in the game. You don't have to talk about any rules at all. It was 2 outs in the bottom of the 6th inning, bases were loaded. Like, you can talk, right? So if your game mechanics get you to that spot, I think you're in a good spot. And obviously there's a gradient of how close or not. Is it worth getting? Is it worth sacrificing really interesting gameplay to get that next little bit perfect theme, right? I think sometimes war games go too far in that respect, where it's like, it'd be nice if you actually just streamlined how this worked and we could get back to the fun decisions, right? So.
Any other thoughts? I'm going to take one last question. Any other thoughts for this one?
I think that narrative, you want it to, the matching is what's most important. The narrative and mechanics match. Because if the narrative and mechanic are divorced, even if you're running a really interesting narrative structure on top of it, or something that is just never seen in games, anybody who is familiar with the topic or familiar with the narrative is going to get increasingly confused, regardless of how much they know the actual game itself. So even if the mechanics are easy to understand, the more that their actual intuitive knowledge is getting blocked, is going to make it much harder to actually get through the rules, and certainly to teach it to new people.
I think, sorry, can I add one more thing? Okay, coming at it from a teacher perspective, I also look at rules as what it's rewarding and what it's punishing in a game. Maybe there's nothing punishing, but is it rewarding the experience that you want and the story that you want to have served? If you have a whole bunch of stuff in there, that's great. Oh, I just designed a spaceship game. It's about like the crew of a spaceship who spend months together in space and how much they like or hate each other at that moment. RPGs. So like the core mechanic of that is trust. You might be mad at each other, but do you trust that when things get dicey, they'll have your back? And if you lose that trust, so that was the core of everything. So every mechanic I designed after that, I cut some of my beautiful darling mechanics that I really loved because it didn't serve that particular reward system, if that makes sense.
One last.
Yeah, I was just specifically for RPGs actually.
Okay. No pressure.
I was wondering, for somebody who's attempting, which is I think something you've done, attempting to like crowdfund a self-published TTRPG, is there any pro tips or like just things that if you could go back and like tell yourself like, oh, like, I wish I knew this when I was doing it for the first time. Like, what would you? I know it's a broad question.
It is such a broad question. I've done full panels on just that question.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Playtest. The biggest thing is to have, like, I generally play test my games for 2 or 3 years at a bunch of local conventions here in the LA area. So if you see me, you can play my games before I actually go to crowdfunding. And that serves, one, to make sure that my mechanics work, my game is completely bomb-proof, hopefully. And then also it builds up a base of people who recognize it. It builds up a mailing list. It builds up a grassroots set of people who are supporting that game and hopefully my future games. So that is one of the reasons I've actually had really good success on Kickstarter, where a lot of RPGs suffer, is just do not think you can never talk to a person, design this perfect game, and then put it on Kickstarter and have it backed. Like, you need to be doing that in person. Like you were talking about in-person playtesting. It serves so many functions, including just getting people to care about you and your stuff, which is the #1 component of Kickstarter. Like, it's not about beautiful videos help, but it's #1. Can you get people to care about you and the thing you're making? And that in-person interaction, sometimes for a lot longer than you'd want, is the #1 component. And embrace that indie vibe. Like, big companies spend so much money, you probably know this, like making their Kickstarters seem, oh, we're kind of like indie, upstart. Like, embrace your indiness and like let that flag fly and just like be really transparent about it. Hey, this is my first thing, blah, blah, blah. Like, my first Kickstarter, like, I planned super well and it funded in like March 1st of 2020. That was, don't do that. Don't fund right before a pandemic, like 12 days before a pandemic. And then, but I had a baby also a month later. But so like I incorporated I'd pose little things as I got components shipped in like way too many months late and stuff like that. It was like who I was and what was happening in my life became part of like the updates and part of that, because that indie vibe is so valuable. So embrace that. Don't try and like pretend like you're $1,000 billion company. Those are my 2 big things.
Can we have a round of applause for our panelists one more time? I do want to make sure that everybody here is able to follow you all on social media or knows where to find you on websites. Jackie, if you wouldn't mind going first on this one, where can everyone find you?
Pretty much everywhere except X. And I unfortunately never knew I was going to need it. So I'm inconsistent with my names, but Jackie Fuchs, 1976, 1 year before 1977. Not the best.
I'm relatively easy to find on the internet. If you search for Damon Stea, you'll find basically every piece of contact you'll ever need to find. But my website is fallofwormwood.com. That's the sovereign website since Ixion is entirely sovereign right now. But easy to find. We also have a Discord that's easy to find. That's just attached to the same page.
Me personally, nowhere. You can find the company, Gap Closer Games. Just that's the website and every handle on every social media platform, probably.
Can I give a pro tip here? When you're saying the name of your your site, you got to enunciate really clearly because they're not writing it down.
You might remember, Fall of Wormwood is
There you
fall of,
go.
and then worm like WORMWOOD. Yeah, it's as unusual as it sounds.
It's Gap Closer Games.
I'm not terribly findable anymore. I've been cutting social media out of my life. Board Game Geek is probably the place to find me. Just Google Board Game Geek John D. Clair and my page will come up. Yeah, it's socialish. And that, I mean, you can see what I've done and message me on there, I guess, that if you wanted to contact. I would say just, I don't want to speak for everybody, but, you know, while I'm here, if there's more questions about game design or anything related, I love talking board games. I love talking game design. So after this panel or tomorrow or whatever, just for the Dodger hat, I'm happy to talk.
I'm the opposite. I am all over the internet. You can find me personally at Golden Lasso Girl. Yes, I am a Wonder Woman fan. Yes, that's where the name comes from. You can find my games at Golden Lasso Games. Again, everywhere but X. I don't know if we still auto post to X. I don't know. You can find the website at goldenlassogames.com. And then you can, if you're interested in my podcast, happyjacks.org is the website. And Happy Jacks RPG is the tag that's on most social media, which is also me. All of those are me. But yeah, just pick one and I can answer. It'll be great.
Thank you again to our panelists. Getting close like we like each other. Like we like each other.
I feel like this entire
It's like the NBA Finals.
I think this entire audience is people who have beat me at Darwin's Journey. So hi, everybody.
Oh, one more. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice to meet you all.